When did the British rule in India begin and end? How was British rule initially established in India? What led to the transition of rule from the East India Company to the British Crown? Why was India important to the British Empire? What were some modern developments introduced by the British in India? What were the negative effects of British rule in India? How did British rule in India come to an end? How was India administratively divided during British rule? Who ruled the princely states in India? Were the princely states completely independent? What was the Indian National Congress's early policy towards princely states? Did nationalism spread to the princely states despite the Congress's policy? What led to political awareness and resistance in the princely states? How did the nationalist movement in British India affect the princely states? How did people in the princely states get exposed to new political ideas? What role did economic inequality play in the rise of nationalism in princely states? How did education contribute to political change in the princely states? What did the educated elites in princely states demand? How did the Indian National Congress influence political leaders in princely states? What were Praja Mandal movements? What inspired Praja Mandal movements? How did global political changes affect the Indian princely states? What period did the Indian national movement begin to expand rapidly? How did the First World War affect India's economy and politics? How was the war expenditure financed in India? What happened to prices between the years 1913 and 1918? What was the impact of forced recruitment during the war? What happened in India during the years 1918 to 1921? What health crisis accompanied the crop failures? How many people died during the famines and epidemic according to the 1921 census? What did people hope for after the war ended? Did the hardships of people end after the war? Who emerged as a key leader during this difficult period? What effect did Gandhi's arrival have on the national movement? What role did Indian soldiers play in the First World War? What was the Rowlatt Act passed in 1919? How did the people of India respond to the Rowlatt Act? What was the Jallianwala Bagh massacre? What did Rabindranath Tagore do in protest of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre? What led to the Khilafat movement in India? Who were some key Indian Muslim leaders in the Khilafat movement? What committee was formed by the Muslim leaders for the Khilafat cause? How did Mahatma Gandhi use the Khilafat issue in the freedom struggle? When was the non-cooperation movement launched and by whom? Who was the president of the Indian National Congress when the movement was launched? What were the main triggers of the non-cooperation movement? What actions did the movement promote? What were some national institutions founded during the movement? When did the non-cooperation movement come to an end? Why did the movement end? What happened at Chauri Chura? Why did Gandhi stop the non-cooperation movement after the Chauri Chura incident? What were the major achievements of the movement despite its premature end? Where was Shekhawati located during colonial rule? How was land divided in Shekhawati? What were Jagir lands in Shekhawati? What was the focus of Shekhawati's first mass movement? When did the Chauri Chura incident take place? Why did the people of Chauri Chura gather on that day? What did the non-cooperation movement encourage people to do? What triggered the violence in Chauri Chura? How did the crowd react to the arrests in Chauri Chura? What happened when the crowd reached the police station? What did the crowd do in retaliation? How many policemen died in the Chauri Chura incident? What caused the villagers' anger? How has the Chauri Chura incident been interpreted by different people? What was the Prajamandal movement? How was the Prajamandal movement connected to India's freedom struggle? What were Prajamandals? Who inspired the formation of Prajamandals? What were the main objectives of the Prajamandal movement? Name some prominent leaders of the Prajamandal movement. What were the key demands of the movement? What repressive practices did the movement oppose? What role did the Prajamandal movement play in Rajasthan? How did the movement affect the integration of princely states after independence? What was the outcome of the integration of princely states? What were Khalsa lands? Did Jaipur state have its own Khalsa lands in Shekhawati? Which was the biggest Jagir in Jaipur state? What percentage of Jaipur state's revenue came from Sikar? Who bore the burden of the revenue from Sikar? How were land revenue rates decided? Was there a fixed law to regulate land revenue? What additional difficulties did peasants face? What sparked the peasant movement in Shekhawati? How did the movement evolve over time? Which political party supported the movement in its later phase? How did the non-cooperation movement affect the peasants? What organization initiated Shekhawati's first mass movement? What did the Chirawa Seva Samiti urge the people to do? How did the local feudal ruler react to the movement? Did the movement stop after the arrests? What was the final outcome of the Shekhawati peasant movement? What system was the Awadh peasant movement primarily against? What was the role of Talukdars? What happened to the Talukdars after the revolt of 1857? What problems did peasants in Awadh face under Talukdars? How did the First World War affect the peasants in Awadh? What was formed in response to these issues in Awadh? How widespread was the Kisan Sabha by June 1919? Who led the Awadh peasant movement? When was the Awadh Kisan Sabha founded? How fast did the Sabha spread in Awadh? Whom did Baba Ramchandra urge to visit the villages? What were the key agendas of the Awadh Kisan Sabha? What kind of boycott did the Sabha promote? How did the movement initially operate? What activities later became associated with the movement? What were the main centers of the Awadh movement? What was Kisanan Sabha? Who was a prominent leader of the Kisanan Sabha? What was unique about Jaggi Devi's activism? Who did Jaggi Devi marry? In which other national movements did Jaggi Devi participate? Did Jaggi Devi continue her struggle after Baba Ramchandra's death? What was the nature of Jaggi Devi's contribution? When was the Quit India movement launched? What happened to the Congress leaders on the morning of the launch? How did the movement continue after the arrests? What action was taken by people to oppose colonial rule? What did the formation of parallel governments signify? Where was the first parallel government established during the movement? Who led the parallel government in Balia? What achievement did this parallel government make initially? What happened to the Balia parallel government later? Why is Chittu Pandey remembered? Which region hosted the longest lasting parallel government? Who led the parallel government in Satara? What was the name of the judicial body under the Satara government? What other reforms were promoted under the Satara parallel government? Until when did the Satara parallel government function? What led to the rise of nationalism in the princely states of India? Where did the Indian independence movement spread beyond the cities? What is the historical importance of Chauri Chura? How did the peasant movement in Shekhawati begin and what did it become later? What was the Prajamandal movement in Rajasthan? What kind of campaign did Baba Ramchandra lead in the United Provinces? What significant event took place in Balia during the Quit India movement? What does the novel Kanthapura by Raja Rao demonstrate? What was the initial nature of the peasant movement in Shekhawati? Who led the Shekhawati revolt and in which decade did it take place? What was the role of Seva Samiti in the Shekhawati movement? What was the main motive of the Prajamandal movement? Who were some prominent leaders of the Prajamandal movement? Who led the Awadh Kisan Sabha movement and what was it against? What were the main demands of the Awadh Kisan Sabha movement? Which places were key centers of the Awadh Kisan Sabha movement? What was the Quit India movement's impact in Balia? Who were the leaders of the parallel government in Balia? What is the setting of the novel Kanthapura by Raja Rao? What is special about the village of Kanthapura in the novel? Who is the protagonist of the novel Kanthapura? Who are two important women characters in the novel Kanthapura?